Speed is a vital concept in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Why else would players say a good start in hand has gas? This is a game where you want to go and go fast. In a broad sense, the quicker you can assemble and disassemble boards, the better off your chances are of winning. On a more specific level, different cards have different speeds, with quick play spells for example being quite fast, and most trap cards being quite slow. And amongst trap cards, what's the slowest, most vulnerable kind? The continuous trap. If you thought that intro meant we'd be talking about fast cards, slow down. This is all about the top 10 worst continuous trap cards. Starting out is the embodiment of everything that can be wrong with the trap monster. We have the original one, Embodiment of Apophis. It released back in 2005 with the Cybernetic Revolution set, although revolutionary is nothing anyone has ever called it. Its effect is pretty simple, and when activated, pretty good. Embodiment of Apophis summons itself as a level 4 reptile normal monster with decent stats, 1600 attack and 1800 defense. But what makes it bad? Perhaps worried that an unrestricted monster might prove too powerful, Konami made it so that this card can only be activated during a main phase. While this might not seem like the hugest hindrance, let's consider the strengths and weaknesses of trap monsters. On the strong side, they don't require a normal summon, since they are instead activated from the back row. On the weak end, they are doubly susceptible to removal, vulnerable to anything that destroys monsters, while also retaining its trap card status, and all the ways your opponent might dispose of one. Another intended advantage of trap monsters is surprise. Because your opponent isn't expecting to have to attack through another body, getting a surprise creature on the field during the battle phase can be pretty okay. Embodiment of Apophis nimbly dodges this potential upside with its main phase summon limitation. If your opponent has more monster removal they haven't yet had the chance to use, they can bet their main phase will continue just long enough to get Embodiment of Apophis out of the way. The intention of Apophis to be surprise monster is revealed by the name. Apophis was an Egyptian demon of serpentine shape that was the personification of chaos. Unfortunately, despite intentions, Embodiment of Apophis does not embody chaos. During the first round of the finals of the Duel Monsters anime Battle City arc, Joey Wheeler matched against Odeon. At the time, everyone thought Odeon was Merrick due to a bit of trickery that really didn't add up to much, except Odeon comatose after getting smote by the gods for trying to play a counterfeit Winged Dragon Ra on the real Merrick's Ortis. Odeon's deck was soon revealed to consist almost entirely of traps, like Judgment of Anubis and Magic Hammer, and 3 copies of Embodiment of Apophis. They're summoned in episode 86, and though Joey and the rest are shocked at the existence of trap monsters, they don't really accomplish much other than attacking a few times and then getting obliterated by Joey's Jinzo. Ultimately, there are worse traps than Embodiment of Apophis, and honestly, more than just 9 that we'll talk about for the rest of this list. But Embodiment of Apophis is a unique kind of bad. It's pretty much the worst of what it is, meaning every other trap monster is bringing stuff to the table that Embodiment of Apophis doesn't. In the end, it's cursed to hang out with Insect Queen and Pumpkin the King of Ghosts as the ace monsters with Duel Link summon animations that no one will ever see. Luckily, it got a retrain with Apophis the Swamp Deity, which retains the main phase binding but has better stats and a mass negation that scales with your face-up continuous traps, as if anyone needed even less reasons to run the original Apophis. Part of what makes this monster so disappointing is it's featured in one of the original anime's most interesting duels, and just look at its cool design. This is a card that could have been good, and instead, it's just pretty bad. And in some ways, that feels worse than a card that doesn't have anything going for it and never did. Still, a free body is a free body, so there's no justifying putting Embodiment of Apophis any higher than number 10. But it's a good jumping off point to lead us to the cards to come that are even worse.
We're going to freeze to death unless we call for help. How does your phone look?
My phone has just enough power to sign up for HelloFresh. I saw they can help you get better at cooking by giving you step-by-step recipes along with the exact portions you need, so you can't possibly get things wrong even if you're a beginner.
Thank goodness you have internet. Quick call for help.
Oh, no can do. I'm too busy thinking about ways to wake up my taste buds with more than 50 flavorful recipes to choose from each week, including fit and wholesome recipes for balanced, veggie-full recipes under 650 calories per serving.
We are going to freeze to death. We don't have time to look at subscription food services.
Ditch the meal planning blues and dive into HelloFresh's biggest menu yet, with 50 plus recipes and even more market items that support your lifestyle. Plus, when you sign up for HelloFresh, you get free appetizers for life. Make restaurant-quality meals at home, starting with mouth-watering apps. Get 1 free appetizer item per box while your subscription is active.
Wait, really? How exactly does this whole thing work?
Just sign up with me and we'll find out together. We're ghosts, we can't die anyway. Thanks to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video. Go to HelloFresh.com and use my code DuelLogsJuly10 and receive 10 free meals plus free appetizers for life. One appetizer item per box while subscription is active if you're in the US. The link and code are valid in all countries and the respective local discounts will apply. The number 9 card on this list comes from the 2004's Rise of Destiny set, which saw the introduction of notable cards like Dekoichi, the Battle-Chanted Locomotive, the Stalos, the Firestorm Monarch, and Divine Wrath. But we're not talking about any of those cards because they're not continuous traps and they're not bad. We're talking about Astral Barrier. Activating this card presents you with a hard bargain every time your opponent attacks a monster. You can save your monster from battle by redirecting the enemy attack to yourself instead. There are definitely times when using this effect would be better than nothing, since monsters are generally more valuable than life points as long as you remain above 0. But overall, this card is pretty trash awful. One of the main functions of monsters is to defend your life points against direct attacks, and they can't do that if you're activating Astral Barrier over and over. You also won't be able to do that for super long because life points run out, and this card makes them run out quickly. And all of that is if it actually goes off as intended. Like almost all continuous traps, it doesn't take much to make it not exist anymore, especially because as continuous macro, its effect is reliant on the card remaining face up on the field. Probably the best way to use Astral Barrier is in coordination with a card called Spirit Barrier that released shortly after its astral counterpart in Soul the Duelist, a set from late 2004. This continuous trap stops you from taking battle damage as long as you control a monster. With the 2, you could effectively protect your monsters and yourself. But actually not so effectively, because a lock that requires on 2 continuous traps without any innate protection is just not going to play. There's not much more to say about the mechanics of this card, other than that it maybe lets you preserve some card advantage at cost of getting your opponent closer to winning the duel. There are other, better ways to stop your opponent's attacks. Use them instead of Astral Barrier. Or don't if you're a super fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. While this isn't anything Konami has confirmed, it's definitely worth mentioning that the art of this card bears a striking resemblance to the character Astral from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal anime. And it's got its name right, Astral Barrier. But anyway, that's just fishing for literally anything to make this card interesting. On to number 8. Indiscriminately annihilating any other card would have considered for the spot on this list is Blind Destruction. This continuous trap from the 2003 set Labyrinth of Nightmare has mandatory resolution during your standby phase when you must roll a dice. Then, Blind Destruction will destroy every monster in the field with the same level as the number that was rolled. If a 6 is rolled, all monsters level 6 and higher are destroyed instead. Was this card competitive? No. But then it wouldn't be on this list if it was. And anyway, you can't play a card called Blind Destruction and not expect it to blindly destruct your strategy, just a little. This card is not biased towards either player. It will thoughtlessly punch random holes in either board, and as fun as this is, it's really not very good. Very, very broadly speaking, in Yu-Gi-Oh! You play cards that help you win. The situations where Blind Destruction might help you are offset by the same amount of outcomes that'll cook you. And yes, you could fix the odds a little with cards like that 6. But like the other cards in this list, it's not worth it. You could literally be running anything else, which is why we're assigning mad props to the duelists who can take Blind Destruction at 3 copies to the highest spot on the Master Duel ladder. Blind Destruction would actually receive a retrained sequel in Code of the Duelist set from 2017. The art of Blind Obliteration depicts the same civilization we saw menaced by the scary green spaceship in the art of Blind Destruction, but this time they strike back against their floating green foe. This card lets you roll 2 die and then calculate the sum, whereupon all face-up monsters with a level or rank lower than a number are destroyed, which is still a gamble, but much easier to use than the original Blind Destruction. And that's largely just because it's not a continuous trap. Your opponent will need actual negation to stop it and not just simple destruction. Standing alone, number 7 is Lone Wolf. Now, don't let this card's epic art and name fool you. You'd be a fool to give it a spot on your deck list. It's not good now, and wasn't good when it released in 2005's The Lost Millennium. Maybe Konami could come out of literally nowhere to release an overpowered archetype around fighter monks. Maybe Tristan Taylor could be the next king of games. So, Lone Wolf, what does it do? Well, it grants battle protection and immunity from monster effects to the small lineup of master monks we mentioned earlier. These 3 monsters are Chusuke the Mouse Fighter, a level 3 Earth Beast with 1200 attack and 0 defense, Monk Fighter, who's a level 3 Earth Rock monster with 1300 attack and 1000 defense, and Master Monk, a level 5 Earth Rock with 1900 attack and 1000 defense. So what do these fiery fighters do? Well, Chusuke does nothing except attack for a disappointing amount of damage and defend using its disappointingly low amount of defense. It's a normal monster, and like Lone Wolf, it's not very good. Monk Fighter is a little better and has the effects that protects its controller from taking battle damage when it fights. Master Monk can only be special summoning by attributing one Monk Fighter, but at least it can attack twice each turn. Granting them battle protection and monster effect immunity isn't bad, and while it wouldn't find a spot on a best of list, it's the part of Lone Wolf's effect we haven't talked about yet that has it locked in for this one. Lone Wolf can only be activated if you have exactly one monster on your side of the field, and that monster is one of the three we just mentioned. If you have more copies of them or literally any other monster on your board, Lone Wolf is a dead set. After it's activated, it doesn't just blanketly apply its effect either. Only the one monster that's on the field at the moment of activation gets its protection, making this card just so useless. Your best bet is just to use it as bait to cheese out your opponent's back or removal. But there are actually a few cards dedicated to buffing the two Monk Fighters and their visually clashing mouse friend. Kaminote Blow is a normal spell that can be activated if you control at least one of the above. It makes it so that your opponent's monsters are destroyed at the end of the damage step if they survive an attack from the fighter Monk 3. Legendary Black Belt is an equip spell that can only be paired with the 3 monsters and provides no stat boost or protection, but does make your opponent take burn damage equal to half the defense of a monster destroyed by battle with the equipped monster. The intended combo of these cards is presumably to ignore Chusuke while you tribute a Monk Fighter for Master Monk, using Lone Wolf to protect it, with Kaminote Blow and Legendary Black Belt to give it extra damage and destruction for its 2 attacks. Is the intended base case scenario here good? No, not at all. Probably the best way to utilize Lone Wolf is to throw Monk Fighter in the field and leave it there, hoping your opponent has no forms of removal. Buying you time to find better cards since they can't destroy Monk Fighter or chip at you with battle damage. Is this good? Still no. We're moving on. And at number 6, we have a trap that's just fascinatingly bad. 2011 Storm of Ragnarok set brought Solemn Authority into the game, but it certainly hasn't seen much gameplay. Solemn Authority is a wildly bizarre card, and a baffling installment in a series of Solemn traps that are otherwise some of the best negates in Yu-Gi-Oh! Solemn Judgment is an omni-negate with a life point cost that you can always pay. Solemn Strike is another low-cost negate. Solemn Warning and Solemn Scolding keep with the life points to negate theme. Solemn Authority is a departure from these related effects and negates nothing. Instead, it lets you target an Azure monster and make it untargetable for as long as Solemn Authority remains on the field. If you're worried this effect might make your Azure monster too powerful, first, why? Second, don't, because Konami clearly thought the same thing, because Solemn Authority sends itself to your graveyard in your second standby phase after activation. While your Azure monsters wouldn't be worse off for receiving Solemn Authority's protection, it's far from the far-reaching effects of its fellow Solemn brethren. There are so many other ways of getting rid of cards that Solemn Authority doesn't stop. Board breakers like Dark Hole and Lightning Storm work around this trap. Non-targeting monster effects like HTS Psyhemoth and Cyber's Quantum Dragon would do the job too. And then there's the always popular Tribute Turtle. Not to mention, all these potential outs for a Solemn Authority imbued Azure boss are just the pens that don't take the very easy steps of removing Solemn Authority first. It's just not a lot of effect for a card that sends itself to the graveyard and falls way below the expectations Konami had set for traps in the Solemn line. The implications of a Solemn card as dedicated Azure supports are staggering. The Solemn Father, who's depicted in all the Solemn traps, is often scolding a young Alkalite for using certain forbidden relics, like the Forbidden Lands and the Forbidden Chalice. Ultimately, the Alkalite would go too far and be cast down with a Solemn Strike. This would not be the end, as the resulting Condemned Witch would in time ascend to power amongst the ranks of the Dark Lords. Here's where things get a little silly. The Dark Lords oppose the Solemn Father, who supports Azure, but the existence of Dark Lord Zerato would imply that him and the Condemned Dark Lord coexist, suggesting that the Sky Palace of the Solemn Father is in fact the Sanctuary of the Sky, which would ally the Azure and Solemn Father with the agents and the various iterations of the Air Knight Parshath. It's a wild melange of angels and demons, and the Azure toe the line between both. The number 5 card on this list has one very specific use case that you'd pretty much never use it for anyway. Phantom Hand released as part of the Shining Darkness set in 2010 with no fanfare and pretty much no one noticing. Fitting that this card is called Phantom Hand because it doesn't have a ghost of a chance of being good. Here's what it does. If you control an Infernity monster, you can banish your whole hand face down until your next standby phase, when you can pick it back up. Get it? You have a Phantom Hand. It's there, but not there. And the way this might be useful is that the powerful effects of the Infernity cards can only be activated when you have no cards in hand. So, with this kind of obvious intended use, why is it bad? Well, like all continuous traps, it's just too slow. Yeah, Infernities have a powerful Omni-Negate counter trap with Infernity Barrier that can only be activated when you've got no hand, but many of the Infernity effects are only going to be activated during your turn. Infernity Necromancer's Revive and Infernity Beetle's Self-Search and Infernity Launcher's Double Res aren't going to be helped by Phantom Hand, because by the time it disappears your hand, it's too late for you to resolve any of these effects. Sure, it could revive an Infernity Arcfiend from your graveyard to pull off its search effect, but why do that during your opponent's turn when there are so many better ways to make it happen during your own and build a stronger board? Yeah, you'll be safe from hand rips during your opponent's turn, but also any hand disruption you have planned aren't going to fly. No Ash Blossom and Joy Spring or Battle Faders here. If you're feeling really janky, you could pair Phantom Hand with monsters outside the Infernity archetype that would benefit from more banished cards like Grand Magia de Aiza or Blade Knight, but now we're just getting silly. Maybe the one real innovative use here is in tag duels where you could use Phantom Hand to reveal your cards to your partner, but that's just so many steps for so little gain. Despite how not good Phantom Hand is, it does have a noteworthy role in the anime, used by the Infernity duelist Kaelin Kessler, who entered the series as one of the Dark Signers, a cohort of evil counterparts to the heroes allied with the Crimson Dragon. Kaelin emerged from the shadows of the past to challenge Yusei to a high-stakes turbo duel. Yusei was distressed because the last time he'd seen Kaelin, his former comrade was being led away, arrested by sector security. Unknown to Yusei, Kaelin would starve to death in his sector security cell, but convinced that Yusei had betrayed him to the cops, Kaelin's hunger for vengeance would allow his soul to make a connection with the earthbound immortals, ancient demons slumbering fitfully beneath the earth. Restored to a bizarre form of almost life for the sole purpose of fulfilling his quest for revenge, Kaelin shocks Yusei with an entirely new dueling strategy. The Kaelin that Yusei remembered played strong attack monsters like Vorse Raider and Geneward Warwolf, and always kept a hand well stocked with cards to play. The new Kaelin, with his mind cooked by the earthbound immortals, death, and the police, has abandoned his prior convictions, and the all-out attack strategy of the Infernities complements his downward spiral. Kaelin has given up on everything good to laugh wickedly as he races around the earthbound geoglyph, all of his cards on the table and his wounds open to the whipping air. Sinking all the way down to spot number 4 is Bottomless Shifting Sand, a card that's been consistently avoiding seeing any kind of competitive play since its 2000 release in the Pharaonic Guardian set. In some ways, the card suffers from similar flaws as Blind Destruction, in addition to them both being continuous traps and all the faults that come with that. But while Blind Destruction pretty much harms both sides equally, or has a decent equal chance of harming both sides anyway, your opponent can totally outplay your Bottomless Shifting Sand, so that it's mostly just messes with you. And let's look at why. During your opponent's end phase, Bottomless Shifting Sand will destroy the monster with the highest attack on the field. This alone would be pretty mad, but maybe forgivable in a deck that for some reason revolves around this effect. Unfortunately for a continuous trap that's already seen enough misfortune, it's got a second part to its effect. If you have 4 or less cards in your hand during your standby phase, Bottomless Shifting Sand blows itself up. Some decks do have lots of draw power, but they definitely won't be sacrificing consistency for the dubious restrictions of Bottomless Shifting Sand, and most decks just use the cards they draw anyway. It's unlikely for this trap to survive your standby phase, but what if it does? Well, since the removal effect isn't going off until your next opponent's end phase, your opponent has literally so much time to fix their board that you have the highest attack monster whenever their turn ends. The best hope for Bottomless Shifting Sand is probably to activate it during your opponent's end phase, while you have a hand count to get rid of it at the start of your turn. And that's just too much effort to make work a card that only wants to drown you in quicksand. If you gotta run a Bottomless Trap card, just take Bottomless Trap Hole instead. Also, what's the deal with calling this card Bottomless and then it blows away all the wind if you have anything less than a full starting hand? This card is as strategically bad as it is thematically confusing. Into the sandpit with it. Tripping and stumbling to number 3 placement of this list of awful continuous traps is a Shattered Axe. Releasing as part of the Enemy of Justice set, a Shattered Axe is an enemy of good strategy that you'd never want to play. It can be activated by targeting one monster on the field that Shattered Axe will be equipped to, and you'll probably want to choose one of your opponents, because even when this card is doing something good, it's really just something bad somewhere else. During each of your standby phases, the monster equipped with Shattering Axe loses 500 attack. That's it. You'd be better off running reinforcements or even castle walls. Something that's probably never been said before. Seriously, castle walls. At least that card might save your defending monster from battle. Shattered Axe isn't going to do it because even though its attack debuffs lingers and even stacks, they don't activate instantly. Not only is this card very slow for continuous trap, but it's even slower than Bottomless Shifting Sand, which just has to be a joke. Except it's not. Shattering Axe is a real card. One kind of interesting thing about this card is that the Shattering Axe bears an uncanny likeness to a Lucky Iron Axe, an equipped spell that boosts the attack of a monster by 500 points. As this visual motif is intentional, then it makes sense that while Lucky Iron Axe increases attack by 500, Shattered Axe reduces attack by intervals of the same kind. Kind of interesting, but not interesting enough for this card to see any kind of play. But even more interestingly, this card has a major appearance during the final ceremonial battle between Yugimoto and the Pharaoh Tim, where the card was called Crumbling Axe instead of Shattered Axe. Yugi equipped it to Obelisk the Tormentor and activated the card Turn Jump, which powered his Silent Swordsman up to 2500 attack, while reducing Obelisk's stats to the same, causing them both to be destroyed by the ensuing battle. This is probably why Shattered Axe was introduced to Duel Links during the first Yugimoto roaming event back in November of 2016. There's a long legacy of cards involving the word Call that have left their mark on the metagame and history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Call of the Haunted, Called by the Grave, and E-Emergency Call are some excellent examples. Even Arcfiend's Call was really good at Duel Links. Call of Darkness from Champion Pack Game 6 cannot claim the same greatness, but it can claim number 2 on this list. Call of Darkness is the continuous trap retrain of an old school normal trap from 2002 called Call of the Grave, and both of these cards are hard counters to Monster Reborn. Call of the Grave specifically activates in response to your opponent's Monster Reborn and negates it. Call of Darkness takes things to the next level by returning all monsters revived with Monster Reborn to the graveyard, and also preventing further Monster Reborns from being played while it's face up on the field. Of course, Monster Reborn is and has been a powerful and iconic card since the start of Yu-Gi-Oh! So you could pick a worse card to hard counter, but the strength of Monster Reborn actually plays against Call of Darkness in a few key ways. Throughout 23 years of competitive play in the TCG, Monster Reborn has constantly wafted between being limited to one copy and being outright banned. As powerful as Monster Reborn is, it's also almost completely generic. There's no guarantee your opponent will ever see it, even if they run a copy, making Call of Darkness a fittingly almost always dead card. This goes with extra emphasis during the spans when Monster Reborn was forbidden. If Millennium Revelation from the recent support for the Winged Dragon of Ra that specifically searches and utilizes Monster Reborn ever did well competitively, I guess you could slot Call of Darkness in as a matchup-specific side deck option. But even stretches believability, because despite allegedly being the most powerful of the god cards, the Winged Dragon of Ra hasn't seen much competitive play, outside of Duel Links anyway, where the Winged Dragon of Ra Immortal Phoenix is actually really good. But even there, Call of Darkness isn't really good. What it is on this list, and that's probably the most anyone will ever have to say for it. And finally, we have the card so useless it's actually worse than Shattered Axe and Call of Darkness. It might have first in its name, but the First Sarcophagus, a continuous trap from the 2004 set Ancient Sanctuary, is the last card you'd ever want to put in a deck. The only first this card will be seen is the number 1 spot on this list of bad cards. Did you ever think to yourself, whoa, those Destiny Board Spirit Message cards are way too powerful? Probably not, because that statement is unhinged. But if you liked what Destiny Board was cooking up with all those easily removable useless draws that can only be placed on the field through the time-locked effect of a continuous trap, you'll love the First Sarcophagus. During your opponent's end phase, you can place the second Sarcophagus and the third Sarcophagus to your spell and trap card zone in sequence. Once you've accumulated all 3, you can send them to the graveyard to special summon the Spirit of the Pharaoh from your hand or deck. Of course, if any Sarcophagi is removed from the field, the rest are going to the graveyard too, because we wouldn't want to make cheating out this thoroughly mid-monster too easy, right? Spirit of the Pharaoh is a level 6 light zombie with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. When it's summoned, and it can only be with the effect of the First Sarcophagus, Spirit of the Pharaoh can revive up to 4 level 2 or lower zombie-type normal monsters from your graveyard. The intended targets for this card are Pharaonic Protector and Pharaoh Servant, both of whom have exactly 900 attack and 0 defense. In the Link era, getting a field full of materials is obviously pretty good, and a full power summon as Spirit of the Pharaoh could yield an Appaloosa Bow the Goddess with 3200 attack and 4 negates, assuming you had a way to convert those Pharaonic Servants into effect monsters. But to pull it off, you'll first need 4, or at least 3 level 2 zombie normals in the grave, plus at least 2 turns miraculously free of interruption to assemble a sarcophagi. And this is already being super generous, because Spirit of the Pharaoh and the First Sarcophagus far precede the Link monsters or even Xyz monsters. The big finisher that Konami intended for these cards was to pull off a mean Spirit of the Pharaoh Quadra summon, and then play 1000 energy to increase the attack and defense of all level 2s by 1000 points until the end phase, where it will then self-destruct. Hopefully, in addition to everything else you'll need for this play, you got a second copy of 1000 energy because 1900 attack isn't going to accomplish much. At least Destiny board lets you instantly win if you pull off its Spirit Message mechanic. The First Sarcophagus is used by the duelist named Abydos III in episode 40 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. The Shadow Riders have awoken and they're coming to do nefarious things in Duel Academy. But there's no reason to fear Abydos III, even though he claims to have never lost a duel. That's actually part of Abydos III's backstory. Because he's the pharaoh, none of his subjects are brave enough to beat him in a duel, even if they could, so they just let him win. Thankfully, his combo Spirit of the Pharaoh and the Sarcophagi cards proved to be super suck, and Jaden Yuki ends his questionable undefeated streak. Speed Duel GX Duelist Shadows actually did bring some unexpected support for the First Sarcophagus. With the Ancient Ruler Rises skill card, you could easily mill normal zombies from deck to grave as cost to place your Sarcophagi, and to top it off, Spirit of the Pharaoh receives a cool 900 attack boost for every Pharaonic Protector and Pharaoh's Servant on the field or in the graveyard. The strat still crumbles faster than the Shattered Axe when faced with any amount of spell and trap card removal, but it's cool that these totally forgettable, completely forgotten cards got a little bit of support. But absolutely not enough support for the First Sarcophagus to take anything less than the first place amongst bad continuous traps. Alright, and that's the list. But there are almost as many bad continuous traps out there as there are continuous traps out there. So if I missed your favorite or you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to write them down in the comments.